Today we face a crisis of fact that is rotting the core of American politics. It is hard not to be struck by the ascendant stupidities that have emerged under the umbrella of free speech. That global warming is a myth, that childhood vaccines cause autism, that President Obama is a Marxist, that the president is not an American, that a cabal of American Jews collaborated with the US government to carry out the attacks on 9/11, and that there was a genocide happening in Libya, and on. Even before technologists have made good on their promise to provide us with virtual realities, we have created multiple realities using nothing more than the internet, cable news, and human nature. The problem here is defactualization. And the danger here is that facts are being reduced to opinions, and that opinions are masquerading as facts. The problem is that as fact and opinion blur together, the belief and the aspiration for factual truth is being expunged from political argument. For example, how many of you know of the truthers? The truthers hold that 9/11 was a secret plot by Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz to seize oil and gas. They point to many facts that they claim are true, that NORAD was made to stand down so that the planes could reach their destinations, that pre-planted bombs brought the World Trade Center buildings down after impact, that the heat of the explosion could only be generated by a government explosive called theramite. Go on the web, you can find hundreds of websites dedicated to this. Who are these truthers? Well, let me tell you, they're mostly liberal, college-educated professionals. Many are engineers and architects. Happens to be where it's centered. Jonathan Kay, who will be speaking at our conference, recently wrote a book called Amongst the Truthers. And some of the things he says is that these truthers in the United States and Canada and around the world erode our society's collective grasp on reality. They evince a kind of nihilistic distrust of government. Everyone feels entitled to their own private reality. And just so you don't think this is a bunch of just tiny crazy, I mean, we're talking about probably between 15 and 20% of the American population, at least according to statistics. Over 30% of the American population believes part of this and that the government is hiding something relevant to what the truthers are saying. There's a certain way in which what these truthers have created is an internal world, in a sense a mirror image on the other side of the Fox News world. An echo chamber for their own voices, one that is in many ways divorced from the reality that the rest of us live in. When they meet conflicting facts, they assume it's a conspiracy. Thus, all other facts are just opinions to be opposed with the conspiracies and new facts that they bring forward. There is a breakdown, in other words, of a common truth. Another example, on the other side, in which we can see the flight in our politics from facts, can be found in the healthcare debate. Mitt Romney, just a couple weeks ago, has continued to repeat the line that the Healthcare Reform Act is a government takeover of healthcare. This claim, which has been making its rounds since 2009, was voted the lie of the year by PolitiFact, a website published in Florida that's dedicated to checking the factual evidence of politicians. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's quite bipartisan. When asked, Romney's campaign responded, quote, "It seems pretty obvious that under Obamacare, the federal government takes on a vastly expanded role in healthcare." He says, whether you call it a takeover or a power grab, the effect is the same. It shifts power and responsibility from the states to Washington. Is it the same to say that the law shifts power and responsibility from the states to Washington, and to say that the law is a government takeover? I think the answer is no. Government takeover conjures a European approach or a Canadian approach in which the government owns the hospitals and the doctors or public employees. That's what it's meant to connote. And it's what most people take it to mean. Most Americans now believe that's what the Health Care Act will do. Against this implication, the facts are the following. Employers will continue to provide health insurance to the majority of Americans through private insurance companies. The law does not include the public option, a government-run healthcare system. No one will be insured by the government. The law requires the purchase of private healthcare and gives tax credits to enable that purchase. Now, let me say, there is much one can disagree with in this law. It does increase government regulation. It does offer a windfall to healthcare insurance companies by subsidizing the private purchase of health insurance. It does raise taxes to pay for these subsidies. And it requires everyone to buy healthcare, which just yesterday was declared unconstitutional by an appellate court in the United States. These are all important and controversial points. It would have been good to debate them. Instead, the major points of debate were around the question of government takeover and, of course, the famous example of death panels, both of which were never issued in the law. Okay, so what? We've always had lying in politics. It's not new. It's not going to go away. Does this lying, this blurring of fact and opinion, this creating of and defending alternative and opposing realities, does it matter? Isn't that what politics has always been about? Well, let's stipulate, as Hannah Arendt wrote in the essay that many of you have read called Truth in Politics, that truth and politics are not on the best of terms. Isn't this just par for the course? Aren't what I'm talking about just sound bites not that important? Why should we be concerned? Well, for Hannah Arendt, the loss of truth is an existential question. She thinks that the loss of truth will mean the loss of our political world and more. It's a big claim. She makes up, in fact, she paraphrases an old Latin maxim, fiat justitia et pereat mundus, let there be justice, even if the world must perish, which she says may not be true. She actually opposes that one. But she says it is true to say fiat veritas et pereat mundas. Let there be truth, even if the world perishes. That's the claim she actually wants to defend here. And the argument she wants to make is that to sacrifice truth for the survival of the world, which would seem to make sense, like we'd rather survive than have truth, will mean the destruction of the world itself. Without truth, without the ability to say what is, there is no permanence. There is no common world. There is no shared world. The danger is that the world as we know it, that which brings us together, begins to wobble. Take any contested issue today, Israel and Palestine, right? Who's at fault? Tit for tat. Terrorism versus existential threat. Holocaust victims versus expulsion victims. We can go on. Who can say what is in that area? Once you get to that point, once you get to the point of where you can't say what is, when you lose an ability to say what is true, you get to the point of what she calls in the essay cynicism. The belief that there is no truth, that everything is just spin, image making. And when you get there, you lose the world world we share together, the world we live in together. And you lose the ground upon which we can form a world together. That is, in a sense, the thesis of her essay, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. It begins with something I started with, and that is central in her essay, which she repeats 3 or 4 times in the essay, which is the reduction today, and today is a longish term in this world. It begins in the mid-20th century and goes through to today. The reduction of facts to opinion. According to Arendt, we are witness to, quote, a large-scale clash between factual truth and politics. This is true despite the fact that, quote, no former time tolerated so many diverse opinions on religious and philosophical matters. We have more freedom of opinion today than any time in history. And yet, she says, we have an incredible hostility to facts that oppose our own interests. So, one thing you should always ask when you read a bold claim like that is she right? Are we hostile to facts that oppose our interests? Well, the example Arendt offers is the fact that in Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Russia, it was dangerous to talk about concentration camps and extermination camps, even though their existence was widely known. Everybody knew this was happening. They just didn't talk about it. Even more disturbing, she writes, is the way we tolerate unwelcome factual truths. In order to tolerate them, we consciously or unconsciously turn them into opinion, right? That's the point she wants to make here. We turn them into opinion. Think about how we do that in our world today. We have such non-facts in our world today, or now facts qua opinions. Torture. It's a fact. We tortured many people over the last 10 years in response to 9/11. But we still insist in this country that we are an exemplary moral country. We say that it's illegal to torture. We say that it's against the U.S. principles to torture. We all know it, but we deny it. We don't talk about it. Take an example from the headlines this week. Pensions. Public employee pensions in this country are simply unsustainable. We cannot pay them. There are very few people who think we will pay them. And no one wants to talk about it. Not seriously. And then there's global warming. As many of you know, there's a debate raging in the United States, around the world, about global warming. Nearly everyone accepts that the Earth's atmosphere is warming. But there is disagreement about whether this is caused by human activity and about how fast it's happening. On one side, you have all these scientists. The number is hard to say, but the vast majority, let's say probably over 95% of climate scientists, think that humans are causing global warming. And there are a bunch, some very respected, who say we don't know, or no, it's not happening. And they're joined by a wide group of bloggers and others who raise doubts about this. A Gallup poll just taken shows that over the last few years, the share of Americans saying that global warming's effects have already begun has decreased from 61% in 2008 to 49% in March. Right? A huge difference, 12% in 2.5 years.